Hello, today we're going to be reviewing The Lamb by William Blake, which was written in 1789. The motif of this particular poem is religious. So the first step for a close read would be just the initial reading. So I'm going to read through it the first time and then we will discuss what to do further. Little lamb who made thee, dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead? Gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly bright, gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Little lamb, I'll tell thee. Little lamb, I'll tell thee. He is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb. He is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. I a child, and thou a lamb. We are called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee. So the next step for this particular close read will be to complete a secondary reading with initial observations. So I would read back through the poem and start making observations as I read. So, for example, my first observation might be that the rhyme scheme is in a pattern until stanza 2, where Blake switches up the pattern of his rhyme scheme when the tone shifts to reveal the truth and message of the poem. Of course, we see it's a steady A, A, B, B, C, C, D, D, A, A in the first stanza. And then, of course, kind of break that up with A, E, F, and then so on and so forth. The third step for this particular poem would be a summary of each stanza. So you would look at each stanza, stanza 1 and stanza 2 in this case, and you would summarize kind of the key messages or points within those stanzas. And so, first of all, stanza 1, I would say in this case, presents a question to the reader. So, to us as the reader, there is a question presented. And the main question is, who created us? Where does our provision come from? But more importantly, going back to that first question, who created us? And again, you see that in that very last line, dost thou know who made thee? And so we have the poet, Blake, in this case, the speaker, presenting us with a question for us to ponder and to think about. It doesn't take us long to receive an answer because then we go down to stanza 2, where we see that the speaker presents an answer to that question. And the answer is that our creator is a personal creator in God, one that has given us his name. We share a name with our Savior, and that is Lamb. And we're going to talk more about what the Lamb symbolizes here in a couple of slides. So again, just to review the steps up to this point, you have step 1, which is just that initial read through where you're just kind of getting a feel for the poem and getting a feel for the patterns. And then that second step is that secondary reading where you make those initial observations. In this case, I made an observation regarding the shift in rhyme scheme and tone from stanza 1 to stanza 2. And then step 3 is where you summarize each stanza or each portion of the poem. Step 4 for this particular poem is where we're going to identify the tone and look at connotation for this poem. So first of all, the tone of this poem is one of reverence and thankfulness. And we see that through Blake's use of positive connotation in language when referencing our creation and Jesus's gentle characteristics. And you can see I've highlighted different instances of positive, and they're not all of them, they're just a few selections, but I've highlighted a few instances of positive connotation and how that helps us see that an overall tone of the poem. Of course, in stanza 1, it talks about gave thee life, gave thee clothing of delight. There's that word delight, which is very positive. Gave thee such a tender voice. When we think of something that's tender, we think sweet, soft. And then if you go to the second stanza, he is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. Of course, children being something that should leave us with a positive impression, positive thoughts. And then little lamb, God bless thee. Of course, that blessing being that positive connotation. And in stanza 1, that connotation, that positive language leads us to see and understand that idea of thankfulness and provision. And then, of course, we get down to stanza 2, which is where the reverence comes in, being in awe of our Creator and who He is, and that He allows us to have that personal relationship. Step 5 is where we would start identifying some literary elements within the text that might help us understand the message. And the first thing is going to be Blake's use of refrains at the beginning and end of stanza 2. Those were very intentional. The repetition of lines here allows the reader to empathize and share in the excitement and thankfulness of the speaker, and emphasizes the identity of Christ as our Savior, which later on in our final steps, we're going to do a final analysis of the poem, and we're going to talk about why that emphasis is so important. But again, it's really important to go through, and as you're doing close reads of poetry, to pull out some of those literary elements that we see that might help us better understand the overall message of the poem. We're going to continue with identifying literary elements. One of the most notable and probably well-known elements within this poem is that symbolic use of the word lamb. This, again, was very intentional on Blake's part. The symbol is well known to represent innocence, purity, sacrifice. And again, this symbol emphasizes to us as the reader that Jesus is our Savior and our Creator, and that we share in that image with Him. And so you can see I've kind of highlighted different instances of the use of lamb. I thought it was very interesting and very telling, the difference between the capitalizations of the word lamb versus if you go down further into stanza 2 where it says, I a child and thou a lamb. Lamb is not capitalized. So I thought it was very interesting how he switched on and off with those. But overall, this symbol is very telling for us as the reader. Even if we didn't overly understand the message of the poem, that use of a lamb, because it's such a classic symbol, would help us to better understand it, which is, again, one of the reasons why it's so important to pull that literary element out to help us better understand the message. And of course, our final step is that final analysis of the poem itself. And of course, there would be other steps. You would break this poem down even more so, but we have a limited time with this video. So we're going to take that final step and just look at Blake's use of the lamb as a symbol of innocence and sacrifice, as well as that positive connotation that represents that tone of thankfulness and reverence, only proves that Blake's message is one of good news. Okay, so again, it points to that positive connotation, that positive meaning. His shift in the pattern of his rhyme scheme in stanza 2, when answering his own question presented in stanza 1, proves that his intention all along was to address Christ as our Creator, providing hope to the reader, and again, playing into that tone of the poem, that tone of thankfulness, that tone of reverence, and just being in awe of who our Creator is and what He has done for us. And so that is the message that we as the reader should be taking away from William Blake's The Lamb. Thank you.